I still remember the day he laughed in my face, the day my patience became his biggest joke. That moment, frozen in my mind like a bad photograph, would become the starting point of everything he never saw coming. My name is Rachel Moore, I'm 32 years old, and I used to believe that in the corporate world, kindness could still win. I believed that if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and kept your ego in check, success would follow naturally. That belief ended the day Ethan Cross walked into my department. Ethan was the kind of man every corporate handbook warns you about, charming in meetings, venomous in private. He joined as the new operations director, technically my superior, though I'd been at the company 5 years longer. He had the kind of easy confidence that made people listen, even when he said absolutely nothing of value. At first, I thought we'd work well together. I'd heard about his results-driven leadership and thought, finally, someone who'll appreciate consistency. I didn't know then that to Ethan, consistency was just another word for weakness. The first few months were tolerable. He'd call me Miss Patience, a nickname he coined because I handled late reports, lazy interns, and his sudden outbursts without losing my temper. It sounded harmless, even flattering at first. But slowly, that name became a weapon. Whenever I'd try to point out a problem, he'd smirk and say, "Don't worry, Miss Patience. You'll probably wait until the problem fixes itself, right?" People would laugh, some awkwardly, others to please him. And I would just stand there, smile politely, and swallow the burn rising in my throat. I told myself not to take it personally. After all, it's just office banter. He probably treats everyone like that. But deep down, I knew he didn't. His tone was different with me, condescending, sharp, almost calculated. Like he was testing how far my patience could stretch before it finally snapped. The real blow came during the spring audit report. I had worked weeks preparing a detailed performance analysis for our logistics branch. It was the kind of report that could have gotten our department noticed by upper management, maybe even positioned me for a promotion I'd quietly been hoping for. On the morning of the presentation, I walked into the conference room, laptop in hand, calm but nervous. The entire senior board was there. And then Ethan, standing confidently at the head of the table, began my presentation. Word for word. He had taken my data, my visuals, my entire narrative, and claimed it as his own. For a moment, I just froze. My heartbeat echoed in my ears while I watched everyone nod, impressed. When it ended, the CEO patted Ethan's back and said, "Brilliant work, Ethan. That's exactly the insight we needed." And Ethan, he looked straight at me and winked. That one gesture said everything. He knew I knew. After the meeting, I confronted him in his office. My voice was shaking, but I tried to sound firm. "Ethan, that was my report. You had no right." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk crawling up his face. "Rachel, you're too emotional. I refined your work, made it presentable. You should be thanking me, not accusing me." Then he said something that burned into my memory forever. "You're patient, Rachel. Maybe too patient. You wait, and life passes you by. People like me? We take what others are too scared to claim." And then he laughed. A low, mocking laugh that made my stomach twist. That night, I sat in my car long after everyone had left the building. My fingers clenched the steering wheel as rain streaked across the windshield. I wanted to scream, to expose him, to quit. But instead, I just sat there, trembling, torn between rage and disbelief. Part of me wanted to think it was over. Maybe he'd stop. Maybe karma would handle him. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered something else, something darker. Time doesn't forget. And patience doesn't mean forgiveness. From that night onward, I started noticing little things, missing files, misplaced documents, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Ethan's influence was spreading fast, and I realized he wasn't just mocking me anymore. He was erasing me. Still, I stayed calm. I smiled in meetings. I played along. Because if Ethan thought my patience was a weakness, he was about to learn it was my most dangerous weapon. And time was already on my side. They say betrayal doesn't arrive with a bang. It walks in quietly, smiling, shaking your hand, until one day you realize it's been sitting next to you all along. For weeks after the audit incident, I tried convincing myself that what Ethan did wasn't personal. Maybe he'd made a mistake. Maybe he'd meant to give me credit later. I wanted to believe that because the alternative, that he'd humiliated me on purpose, was too painful to accept. But the signs started small. First, it was the email omissions. Suddenly, I wasn't copied on project updates I had initiated. My reports were rerouted through his assistant. When I asked him about it, he gave that same infuriating smile and said, "Oh, I just streamlined the workflow, Rachel. You don't need to worry about the technical stuff." Streamlined. That was his favorite word, polite enough to sound rational, vague enough to cover a lie. Then came the favoritism. Ethan began holding private coffee meetings with a handful of newer employees, mostly those who flattered him or mirrored his ambition. I'd see them leaving his office laughing, whispering, while I walked in later to cold stares and clipped instructions. He'd joke in meetings, "We've got some young blood around here finally shaking things up," his gaze cutting toward me, daring me to react. Every word was a needle, sharp, precise, and always coated with charm. One Friday afternoon, I stayed late finalizing a shipment proposal. Ethan appeared behind me unexpectedly, his voice low and casual. "Still here, Miss Patience? You really do love this place more than it deserves." I didn't look up. "Just finishing the logistics draft. It's due Monday." He circled around my desk, glancing at the charts on my screen. "You know, Rachel, you could save yourself a lot of time if you let me review these before you send them out. You tend to overthink things." That stung. Not because of what he said, but because part of me believed it. I'd spent so long trying to be thorough, careful, respected. But now every bit of my effort was being painted as insecurity. Still, I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Sure. I'll send them over." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Good girl." And, just like that, the air in the room shifted. Something about his tone, the ownership in it, made my stomach knot. I didn't say a word. He walked out, leaving the faint scent of his cologne behind, and I sat there staring at my computer screen, feeling smaller than I ever had in my entire career. Over the next few weeks, my instincts started screaming, but I buried them under rational excuses. He's just testing my professionalism. He's under stress. He's not that bad. But deep down, something was unraveling. I'd started doubting myself. I began checking emails twice, editing reports 3 times, rehearsing even casual sentences before speaking. My confidence, once quiet but solid, now cracked at the sound of his voice. The worst part? He noticed. He'd interrupt me in meetings just to clarify my points, rephrase my ideas like they were his own, and flash that winning grin that made the whole room forget who'd actually spoken first. When people began addressing him instead of me for updates on my projects, I smiled and told myself it was just hierarchy. But every time he laughed, that same mocking, easy laugh, I felt a storm brewing inside me. One afternoon, I overheard 2 interns whispering near the break room. Ethan said Rachel's a bit too nice for management. Yeah, he joked she's like the HR version of decaf coffee. They laughed quietly. I froze. Not because they were cruel, but because it confirmed what I feared. He was shaping how people saw me. And he was winning. That night, when I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my reflection in the dark window. My face looked tired, eyes dull, shoulders slumped. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I whispered to myself, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm overreacting. But even as I said it, a quiet, stubborn voice rose inside me. No, something's wrong. He's doing this on purpose. A week later, I stayed late again. Most of the office lights were off except for the soft glow from Ethan's glass-walled office. I noticed him inside with our HR head, Laura, voices low, body language too close. I couldn't hear their words, but the laughter that followed sounded intimate. The next morning, Laura avoided eye contact with me entirely. And by that afternoon, a memo went out announcing a new performance review system, one that placed greater emphasis on team synergy and adaptive leadership. Translation: Ethan had just designed a system that favored those loyal to him. I should have confronted him again. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because part of me still clung to the illusion that patience would save me, that the truth always surfaces on its own. So I kept waiting. But that weight came with sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and a gnawing suspicion that something bigger was happening behind the scenes, something that would cost me more than pride. And as much as I tried to silence it, that small, cold whisper inside me kept returning. He's not just mocking your patience, Rachel. He's betting on it. When the betrayal finally came, it didn't crash down like thunder. It whispered, calm, casual, almost routine, before burning everything I believed in to ash. It started on a Tuesday morning. The kind of day that feels too ordinary to destroy you. I was preparing for the quarterly review presentation, the biggest one of the year. For weeks, I'd poured every ounce of effort into building a new cost-efficiency model for the logistics division. I'd stayed late, skipped weekends, and even missed my best friend's birthday dinner because I knew this report could shift my entire career trajectory. If things went right, I'd finally be considered for the senior operations role that had been under discussion for months. Ethan had been unusually quiet lately, no sarcastic comments, no snide jokes. He'd even stopped calling me Miss Patience. For a brief moment, I thought maybe he'd finally started respecting me. Maybe he realized my loyalty wasn't weakness, it was strength. I should have known better. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the executive boardroom. I arrived early, nerves tingling with anticipation, and set up the slides on the projector. When the rest of the team began filtering in, I noticed Ethan wasn't there yet. 5 minutes later, the door opened, and he walked in, holding a sleek black folder. The CEO, Mr. Davenport, followed right behind him, smiling. "Ah, Rachel," Davenport said warmly. "We just reviewed the strategic expansion plan Ethan submitted. Impressive work. This could really set our logistics division apart." My stomach dropped. "Expansion plan?" I asked carefully. "What expansion plan?" Ethan looked at me, no smirk this time, no nervous twitch. Just calm, confident control. "Oh, Rachel. I meant to tell you," he said smoothly. "I used your data projections from the efficiency model to draft a proposal for regional expansion. I wanted to surprise you." Surprise me. He used my work, the entire model I'd been building, and turned it into his own pitch, branding it as his strategic proposal. The CEO smiled again, completely unaware of the theft. "We're presenting this to corporate next week, Ethan. Fantastic initiative. You'll be heading the expansion team in Chicago." My chest tightened. Chicago. That was the position. That was the promotion I'd quietly dreamed about. And it was gone. After the meeting, I followed Ethan into the hallway. My voice trembled, my pulse hammering in my ears. "You stole it again. My data, my analysis. That was my project." He turned, calm as ever, adjusting his cufflinks like we were discussing the weather. "Rachel, listen," he said, tone dripping with faux concern. "You're talented, no doubt. But you get lost in the details. You need someone who can take your work and make it corporate ready. That's what I do." I just stared at him, struggling to find air. "You mean you take what isn't yours?" He smiled faintly. "If you were smarter, you'd thank me for making your work matter." Then he laughed. That same mocking laugh that started it all. Right there, in the middle of the hallway, while my hands were shaking and my heart was breaking, he laughed like my pain was entertainment. I stumbled into the restroom and locked myself inside a stall. My breath came in ragged bursts. The walls felt like they were closing in. I tried to tell myself it wasn't happening again, not this blatantly. But it was. And I had let it. My mind replayed every moment, every red flag I'd ignored, every cruel joke I'd brushed off, every time I'd told myself to stay patient. He hadn't just mocked my patience. He'd built his entire success on it. Tears burned down my cheeks, but it wasn't sadness anymore. It was humiliation, raw and blinding. How could I have been so naive? I gave that company everything. I gave him respect, cooperation, trust, and he used all three like stepping stones. For a long moment, I just stared at my reflection in the mirror, eyes red, shoulders shaking. The woman looking back wasn't calm anymore. She wasn't patient. She wasn't the version of Rachel who believed good people eventually win. She was quiet, but dangerous. That night, I stayed late again. The office was empty, the city lights flickering through the glass walls like fading hope. I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop, replaying Ethan's smirk in my head. In the silence, something inside me hardened. I realized that waiting for karma wasn't enough. Karma moves slowly, and I'd already wasted years waiting. If time was going to handle it, then I would become time. The patient woman he mocked was gone. In her place stood someone who would make every second count, carefully, quietly, and without mercy. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Because I finally understood something Ethan never would: the deadliest revenge doesn't come from rage. It comes from silence. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the dim office, surrounded by the ghosts of every late hour I'd spent proving myself. The city outside shimmered through the rain-soaked glass, its lights blurred, its rhythm distant. For the first time in years, the silence didn't comfort me. It accused me. Every tap of rain against the window whispered the same truth: no one's coming to save you, Rachel. And it hit me like a gut punch. All those years I had believed in fairness, in hard work, in letting time handle it. I'd been waiting for the universe to notice my pain, for anyone, to call out Ethan's lies. But the universe wasn't blind. It was indifferent. Justice didn't come to those who waited. It came to those who learned how to move in silence. That realization didn't feel like courage. It felt like survival. I drove home through the downpour, headlights slicing through the mist. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tight as Ethan's words replayed in my head. You wait, and life passes you by. He was right, but not in the way he thought. My patience wasn't weakness. It was a weapon I hadn't learned to use properly. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, makeup streaked, eyes swollen from crying, and stared at the woman staring back. I whispered, "You waited long enough." And for the first time, it didn't sound like regret. It sounded like a plan. The next morning, I walked into the office with a calm that unnerved even me. The fluorescent lights still buzzed, the air still smelled of burnt coffee and ambition, but everything looked different, sharper, clearer. Ethan greeted me with his usual arrogance. "Morning, Miss Patience," he said with a grin. Ready to watch the magic unfold? He was referring to his upcoming meeting with the CEO, the one where he'd pitch my work as his official expansion plan for Chicago. I smiled back. "Of course. You deserve all the attention, Ethan." And just like that, his guard dropped. He chuckled, completely unaware that for the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was observing. Over the next few days, I began studying him. How he spoke, how he phrased his lies, how he manipulated charm into currency. I noticed his patterns, the way he complimented before he cut, the way he twisted facts into applause. And quietly, I started documenting everything. Emails, voice notes, message logs, every trace of my original data. I stored copies in encrypted folders, timestamped and backed up outside the company server. I began collecting evidence, not as revenge yet, but as insurance. Every keystroke, every file name, every smirk he threw at me, all of it went into a digital box labeled Patience. Because this time, patience wouldn't be passive. It would be strategic. But before I could take him down, I had to rebuild myself. For weeks, I'd lived in the shadow of humiliation, but now I forced myself into focus. I reconnected with old colleagues, volunteered for new projects, and started contributing under the radar. Quietly, efficiently, I began reclaiming my space. And slowly, I noticed something: people had started to notice me again. "Rachel, that was a solid idea in the logistics report," one manager said in a meeting. "I thought Ethan came up with it, but Davenport mentioned your name in passing." Ethan didn't like that. I saw the flicker in his eyes. For the first time, he realized I wasn't fading, I was returning. One evening, after another long meeting, I found myself alone in the elevator with him. He leaned against the wall, grinning. "You've got fire again, Rachel." I almost missed that. "Just don't make the mistake of thinking this is a competition." I looked at him, really looked, and saw it. The insecurity behind his confidence. The man who thrived on control was terrified of losing it. So I smiled, calm and deliberate. "Oh, it's not a competition, Ethan," I said softly. "It's a timeline. And yours just started ticking." The doors slid open, and I walked out, leaving him with a look I'd waited months to see: confusion. At home that night, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I reread my notes, my proof, my growing collection of quiet truths. I realized that revenge wasn't about making him suffer, it was about making him irrelevant. He mocked my patience because he thought it meant inaction. But he never understood that real patience isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about standing still long enough to learn where to strike. And now I knew exactly where. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The ache was still there, the betrayal, the anger, the humiliation, but underneath it all was something new. A pulse of power. A calm, steady certainty that time would no longer be my enemy. Time was now my partner. My accomplice. My secret weapon. Ethan thought he'd broken me. But in truth, he'd just built the version of me he should have feared all along. And I couldn't wait for him to realize that the woman he mocked for her patience was about to use it to destroy him. Ethan thought I'd given up. That was his first mistake. After stealing my work, after mocking the very patience that had kept me afloat, he expected me to retreat quietly, to fade like background noise while he shined. And I let him believe exactly that. I became invisible again. But this time, by choice. Every smile, every polite nod in the hallway, every "sure, Ethan, you're right," was calculated. Because beneath that calm mask, I was setting the clock. And time was finally mine to control. The first step was reconstruction. I went back through months of archived files, cross-checking everything related to the logistics and expansion models. Every email I'd sent him, every attachment he'd downloaded, every timestamp that proved when my data had been created, I backed it all up. Then, I began organizing it into a detailed trail: version logs, digital fingerprints, edits, and drafts, each one showing that the foundation of his Chicago expansion plan was my work, not his. But I didn't stop there. I created a subtle breadcrumb path on the company servers, one that led anyone who looked closely enough back to the original author, me. All I needed was time and the right opportunity for someone important to notice. The second step was exposure through trust. Ethan had a weakness that he thought was a strength: his arrogance. He believed people admired him. He believed Laura from HR adored him. And he wasn't entirely wrong. But Laura had started noticing cracks. She'd once been charmed by him, sure, but even she had grown tired of his manipulation. I saw it in her hesitation during meetings, the quiet discomfort when he joked too freely, the way she avoided eye contact afterward. So, I planted the first seed. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee in the break room, I casually said, "Laura, you've been around here longer than anyone. How do you handle it when someone takes credit for your work?" She paused mid-sip, watching me. "Did someone take your work, Rachel?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, nothing official. Just one of those team effort situations, you know." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know how that goes." And just like that, she started paying attention. The third step was perception control. Ethan loved the spotlight. He couldn't resist attention, especially when it came from upper management. So I gave it to him, in doses that fed his ego just enough to make him careless. I praised him publicly. I backed his ideas in meetings. I even brought him coffee before big presentations. To everyone else, I looked like the perfect assistant: loyal, humble, harmless. But behind the scenes, I was recording everything. Every slip, every contradiction, every lie he told while presenting my work. I started noting patterns: his inconsistencies, his fabricated statistics, the missing data he couldn't explain because he didn't actually understand the models. Then, I began quietly leaking small truths to the right people: technical analysts, auditors, and the senior data manager, Clara, who had always respected my work. I didn't accuse Ethan of anything. I didn't have to. I simply let my data speak for itself. Weeks passed. Ethan grew bolder. His laughter grew louder. His confidence became theatrical, the kind of overcompensation that comes right before the fall. He thought I was still broken. He thought my silence meant surrender. And so, when corporate scheduled a preliminary review meeting before the Chicago launch, Ethan didn't see the storm I was quietly steering toward him. He sent me the final deck for review, as he always did, not to ask for input, but to have someone clean up his sloppy details. But that night, as I went through the slides, I made a few minor adjustments. I replaced one of the core data visuals, the same one he'd claimed as his own, with a version that clearly showed my original author tag, timestamp, and metadata. It wasn't blatant. You had to hover, inspect, and know where to look. But the executives would look. They always did. The morning of the meeting, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Ethan stood at the front, perfectly confident, his voice steady as he spoke. I sat quietly near the back, notebook open, pretending to take notes. Everything was going smoothly until Mr. Davenport interrupted mid-presentation. "Ethan," he said, frowning slightly. "This dataset, it's tagged under Rachel Moore." "Why?" The room went silent. Ethan blinked. "Oh, that's just a formatting issue. She helped with some early drafts. Davenport repeated, leaning forward. "The timestamps show this is the original version." Ethan froze for half a second, barely noticeable, but enough. I caught it. So did Laura. I'll have to double-check that," he stammered. Davenport turned toward me. "Rachel, can you clarify this?" I looked up slowly, meeting Ethan's eyes. And for the first time, I saw panic flicker behind that arrogant grin. I smiled gently. "Of course, sir. That was part of a project I'd been developing before it was merged with Ethan's proposal. I can pull up the source files if you'd like." Davenport nodded. "Do that. Let's ensure proper attribution before this moves forward." Ethan laughed nervously. Of course. Must have been an oversight." But everyone in the room knew it wasn't. That night, he stormed into my office. "You set me up," he hissed. I looked up from my computer, calm as ever. "No, Ethan. I just let time handle it." His jaw tightened, fury barely contained. "You think this changes anything?" I smiled faintly. "Not yet. But it will. Because this was only step 1, exposure. Step 2 would make him watch everything he'd built crumble, piece by piece. And the best part? He'd never see it coming, because he still thought I was too patient to fight back. Poetic justice doesn't come in noise. It arrives in silence, the same kind of silence that once mocked you, now turned into your echo of victory. By the time the Chicago expansion review came around, the boardroom felt different. The tension was invisible, but it sat in the air like static before lightning. Ethan stood at the front again, smiling that same smug smile. He was confident, maybe even more than before, because he thought he'd recovered from the last metadata hiccup. He had smoothed things over with the executives, convinced them it was a small clerical mix-up. But what he didn't know was that his reputation was already bleeding quietly, and I was the one making every cut invisible. In the weeks after the first exposure, I had been careful, painfully, perfectly careful. I never accused him of theft. I never badmouthed him. I never even hinted at revenge. Instead, I helped him. Every time he asked for edits, I delivered them. Every report he sent up the chain had my quiet fingerprints embedded in places no one would notice, except auditors and IT investigators. Because alongside my professional trail, I'd built another, an undeniable digital record of his deceit. And then, I gave it away. Not to the CEO. Not to HR. To the corporate audit division, the only department Ethan couldn't charm or manipulate. I didn't even have to tell them what to look for. I just submitted a simple note through the compliance portal: potential data ownership inconsistencies between Operations Director Ethan Cross and Analyst Rachel Moore. Recommend metadata verification before next expansion approval. It took less than a week for the dominoes to fall. The day of the big review felt cinematic. The blinds were half drawn, sunlight cutting thin white lines across the table. The CEO, the audit director, HR, and Ethan all seated, all waiting. I sat quietly in the back again, same seat as last time, hands folded on my lap. When the audit team started the presentation, the air shifted. After verifying submission timestamps and server log activity, the lead auditor began. "We've identified extensive overlaps between Mr. Cross's submitted files and earlier documentation by Ms. Moore." Ethan straightened in his chair. "Wait, overlaps? I already addressed that misunderstanding." The auditor clicked the next slide. A large screen filled with side-by-side visuals, my drafts on the left, his on the right. Identical data. Identical formatting. Identical typos. And in the corner of each, the same digital signature, Rachel Moore, time-stamped months earlier. The CEO's expression hardened. "Ethan, care to explain this?" Ethan stammered. "She must have. We collaborated." The auditor interrupted, calm and merciless. "Collaboration doesn't explain server edits logged under your credentials 2 weeks after her original submissions were archived." A murmur rippled across the room. And then, the final blow. The screen changed again, showing internal messages Ethan had sent to Laura and 2 junior staffers, messages he thought were deleted. "Make sure Rachel doesn't see the final deck before submission. If she asks, tell her I handled the revisions personally." Every word a nail in his coffin. He looked at me finally, truly looked at me. And for the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes. Only shock. I met his gaze, calm and steady, and whispered, "Time always keeps receipts, Ethan." The meeting ended with formality: suspension pending investigation, access revoked, internal inquiry underway. Ethan tried to speak to me in the hallway afterward, but security was already escorting him out. He muttered, "You planned this." I smiled faintly. "No, Ethan. You did." He opened his mouth to respond, but the elevator doors slid shut between us, a perfect cinematic ending. But the real satisfaction didn't come from his downfall. It came from the quiet aftermath, the silence that followed. Within a week, word spread across departments. Ethan Cross, the once golden boy of operations, had been terminated for data falsification and ethical violations. The Chicago expansion was placed on indefinite hold. And me? I was promoted to Senior Operations Manager, officially credited as the original architect of the model that started it all. But even then, I didn't celebrate loudly. I still walked the same hallways, spoke in the same calm tone, smiled the same patient smile. Because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already won, not through rage or exposure, but through precision. One evening, I found myself alone again in the boardroom, long after everyone had left. The same glass walls. The same skyline. But the energy had shifted completely. I looked at the empty chair where Ethan used to sit and whispered softly, "You mocked my patience, but it was patience that destroyed you." I thought of all those nights when I'd wanted to scream, to fight, to quit. But instead, I'd chosen to wait and to watch. And in the end, I realized something profound. Patience isn't about waiting for justice. It's about building it quietly, carefully, until the truth stands tall on its own. As I turned off the lights and walked toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass. No longer the tired, overlooked woman who'd once doubted her worth. Now, I looked like someone who had learned the art of stillness with purpose. Someone who understood that time doesn't always heal, sometimes it avenges. And that night, I let the silence speak for me, the same silence that once broke me, now echoing like victory. Some victories don't sound like applause. They sound like peace, the kind that comes when the noise finally stops. It's been 7 months since Ethan Cross was escorted out of the building, and sometimes I still hear the echo of his shoes fading down the marble hallway. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of everything I survived. After he was gone, the office changed in ways only silence could explain. People spoke softer. Meetings ran smoother. The air felt lighter. And for the first time in years, I could breathe without watching my back. But peace didn't come instantly. It arrived slowly, like dawn seeping into a room that had been dark too long. In the early weeks after his termination, HR handled the formalities, exit interviews, audits, a quiet internal memo that never reached the press, but spread like wildfire through corporate whispers. Ethan's name became a cautionary tale, the man who underestimated the quiet woman in the corner. His fall wasn't just professional. I heard rumors, the failed interviews, the withdrawn offers, the reputation that followed him like a shadow. Companies didn't want someone under investigation for data manipulation. He'd mocked my patience, and in the end, it was patience that erased him. I remember sitting in my new office the day my promotion letter arrived. Same skyline. Same coffee mug. but everything felt different. The letter didn't feel like triumph, it felt like closure. I realized then that revenge isn't about watching someone fall. It's about finally standing without them. I'd spent years trying to prove my worth through others' recognition. But the real transformation began the moment I stopped waiting for validation and started trusting the quiet voice that whispered, "You already know the truth." One afternoon, months after the storm had passed, I found myself at a small cafe near the lake, the kind of place where time slows down. I was journaling, something I hadn't done in years, when a woman sitting nearby recognized me from a corporate seminar. She said softly, "You're Rachel Moore, right? I've heard your story. You took down the golden boy of Cross and Howard." I smiled, shaking my head. "No, I just let truth take its time." She looked puzzled. "You mean, you didn't plan it?" I laughed quietly. "Oh, I planned. But planning isn't revenge, it's alignment." I didn't destroy him. I just stopped protecting him from the truth. Later that night, walking by the lake, I reflected on how that single betrayal had reshaped me. Ethan's deceit taught me 3 things, lessons that no MBA, no mentor, no corporate ladder ever could. First, patience isn't weakness. It's the highest form of power. Because when you learn to wait, not out of fear, but out of confidence, you become unstoppable. Second, silence speaks louder than confrontation. There's something divine in letting the truth unfold naturally. Watching arrogance trip over its own lies is far more satisfying than shouting for justice. And third, self-worth doesn't need applause. It just needs you to stop apologizing for existing in your full strength. A few weeks ago, I got an unexpected email. From him. Subject line, "You won." 2 words. Nothing else. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because he was wrong. I didn't win. Time did. And I simply stood still long enough to let it do what it always does, reveal everything. These days, I mentor young women entering the corporate world. When they ask how to deal with manipulation or injustice, I always tell them the same thing. Don't rush to prove your innocence or worth. Let your consistency do it for you. People who mock your patience don't realize time is keeping score. A few days ago, I walked past the old boardroom again, the same place where Ethan once tried to take everything from me. The chair he used to sit in is empty now. But I didn't feel bitterness. I felt gratitude. Because if he hadn't mocked my patience, I might never have discovered how strong it truly was. The city lights shimmered through the glass walls as I whispered the words that had become my truth. Patience isn't waiting. It's building quietly until the world finally catches up. And with that, I walked away. No more revenge. No more bitterness. Just peace, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. To everyone listening right now, maybe someone has mocked your patience. Maybe they've used your silence, twisted your kindness, or made you question your worth. But remember, time sees what you can't. You don't need to chase karma. You just need to stay steady, stay honest, and let the truth do its work. Because eventually, even the loudest liars get quiet. And when that silence finally comes, it sounds exactly like justice. Have you ever faced a betrayal like Rachel did? Did you fight back, or did you let time handle it for you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if this story hit your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more real, raw stories of strength, betrayal, and poetic justice. Because sometimes, the best revenge is no revenge at all, just peace.